Thank you, Sawyer, so much for bringing us the reading from the gospel today. We heard that story last week when I introduced that this story of the stilling of the storm, for me, is a great story and a perfect metaphor for what an interim time is like. That is, a time when you have said goodbye to something, but you haven't yet said hello to something else. That journey between the goodbye and the hello is like. A journey, in fact, that we as a community, this church, is in right now, and each of us are in our own lives, in our own individual ways. And I introduced last week that to have an interim time, you have to indeed say goodbye. You have to leave something to go on a journey, and we're invited to do so all the time. And sometimes it's hard. And this week, I want us to get a little bit deeper into the story of what is before us and what is with us along this interim way. Will you join me in prayer? God, you are indeed with us. And in all the ways we see everything that is you, in sunshine on snow, in the warmth of this place, in friends and strangers coming together to be a community, and in hearing a story that reminds us where you are. So be with us now in our speaking and in our listening. For you, God, are our rock and our strength. Amen. So I shared last week that in my own life, I had an invitation into an interim time personally when I was going away on a sabbatical. That is, I was going to have 3 months not to have to go to work or not to have to go to school. Wow, what a gift that is. And I thought of lots of boring things to do. But then I had this picture of a sailboat and me out on this sailboat, and I shared what a horrible picture that was. Because I have never liked boats. I have never liked being out on the water. I hate wind and I hate tippy things, but I had this picture of this boat. So I want to tell you this Sunday what happened when I left and went out on an adventure, because I did go. I showed up at sailing classes thanks to the encouragement of a friend, and let me tell you, it was great. It was really, really, really great. I showed up at the first class, and we were asked to bring our chairs into a little circle. We were asked to put on name tags. There were a bunch of moms and dads with their middle-aged children, 7th, 8th graders who were learning how to sail. And I looked around this circle, looked at my little book, and I said, I can so do this. I have done this so many times. Sat in a circle with a name tag and a book, learning together. It was great. Then we had our lesson, and I was a little nervous. Because as you know, I don't like boats, and I don't like being out on the water very much. So we went out for our lesson. But fortunately, it was perfect sailing conditions. There was absolutely no wind. No wind at all. So we all sat in our little tiny boat. We barely made it off the dock. And I said, I can so do this. I can so do this. This isn't so bad. The sail way out to the side, trying to catch the glances of a gentle breeze. I came back for my second lesson the second week. And again, Things were looking pretty good. Just a few little ripples on the lake. Perfect sailing. We got out in our little boat. We got out into the lake. And suddenly, something was creaking above my head. And something big and wooden moved to the other side of the boat. And the sails, poof, filled with wind, and suddenly our little boat was up, rising higher and higher and higher above the water, and somebody on our boat was yelling, "Is this all right? Are you sure this is all right?" And the instructor said, "This is fine. This is absolutely fine." "Are you sure? Are you really sure? I know we're going to tip over." And right then, I realized I recognized that voice. It was mine. Have you ever been so scared sometimes that you didn't even recognize your own voice? I was terrified. I saw myself flipped overboard, my feet tangled in ropes, caught in the sail, down in the cold water. The instructor said, "We're fine. We have a 500-pound keel under us." I had no idea what a keel was. I didn't know if it could break, if it could fall off, but all I knew was that my life depended on it. And at that point, I realized what was behind my needing to learn how to sail. And I remembered a story from many, many years ago. It was my freshman year of college, and our professor opened up this old book, and he read from it these lines. He said, "There is something in life with which we all must reckon. It is the void from which everything comes and to which everything returns, and against it there is no escape." Well, you know, each and every one of us in this room could talk about our experiences of the void. We all face the void in times of change, in times of transition, in times of fear, and in times of death, in all of the ways and shades those come. We face the void anytime we face not knowing something. And it happens to us all the time. And we look ahead and we wonder what's going to happen. It happens when somebody in our family dies. Maybe it's a grandparent. Maybe it's a spouse. Maybe it's a friend. It happens at the end of a relationship. It happens when you graduate from one grade and are facing going to a new school or a new place. It happens for all of us whenever you leave what was and are facing an uncertainty of what will be. It happens to all of us all the time, and we could all tell our stories of facing the void. It was exactly that void which Sawyer shared the story about this morning. Out there in the little boat, Jesus' friends are in a panic. A wind has come up. Their boat is tipping over and filling perhaps with water. They're terrified. They don't know if they're going to make it through. And where's Jesus? Asleep in the boat. And they're mad and they're scared and they say, "Wake up. Don't you care that we're going to flip over out here?" And Jesus wakes up. And the wind calms down and the waves calm down. And Jesus looks at his friends and says, "Where was your faith?" In other words, Where's your trust when the storm comes up and the waves are harsh and you're facing a void in your life? What do you trust in? Where's your trust? Well, this story is exactly a metaphor for what it felt like in the early church. The people who wrote the Gospel of Mark were in a little tiny community. Jesus has died, and they don't know where they're going to go. They don't know what's going to happen. But what they do know is it feels like a little tiny boat going across a great sea. And in fact, an image of the early church is of what? A sailboat. So there they are in their little boat, and the writers of the Gospel of Mark wanted to remind people that even when life gets really scary and uncertain, and even when death comes to our lives in its many forms, God is always with us and will never leave us. But where's your trust, and where's my trust at times like that? Where, in other words, do you go from this into this, and how do you get there? For H. Richard Niebuhr, who was the theologian, that is somebody who writes about God things, who said we all have to face this void, said this as well. Our job is to trust in the void, to trust in that part of creation, that which is God, from which everything comes and to which everything returns. But how do you learn how to trust? Well, it was a couple of years after my second sailing lesson, and I was out sailing with my cousin on a boat that neither one of us knew very well, and both of us are learning how to sail. We come around the side of this island, and we're on a run. Some of you know what a run is. The wind's coming from behind our boat, and our sail's way out to the side. And I'm there, with my hand on the tiller, looking ahead, and suddenly I hear that horrible noise. I hear this boom, like moving across the other side of the boat. Something's happening, and I do what perhaps you do when you're scared. I grabbed on. Just grabbed everything and pulled it tight. And the boom went to the other side, and I kept pulling it tight. And the boat went up higher and higher and higher above the waves, and water, lots of water, started coming into the boat. And there was lots of noise on that boat, and a lot of it coming from me. What should we do? What should we do? What should we do? And have you ever been like that? Have you ever been like that? And if you've got two hands today or a hand today, do that. Who are you when you do that? When do you do that? When are you doing that in your life? I was doing that, and harder as I could doing that. And then the tiller flipped out of my hand, and I was so startled, I let go of everything. Do that. And then what happens? What happens when you do that on the boat? It comes right around up into the wind, and it stops. But you have to get from that to that. How do we do that? You know, there's a place and a time in all of our lives for this. There's nothing wrong with this. Sometimes we have to do this. But our story is that amidst the storms of life and amidst the voids, the unknowns that we all face, we don't do a whole heck of a lot of good just doing that. The invitation of today is we have to learn how to do this, and to open our hands and to trust that there is a 500-pound keel under us. And in fact, the word of trust is this, that in life and in death, in known and unknown, in interim times of uncertainty, we are caught by something, call it God, from whom and will never let us go. As I learned to sail over the years, I often went sailing with Doug, who was my sailing instructor. And we'd be out there sailing, and he would say to me, "Peter, can you feel it? Can you feel it?" I'd say, "Feel what, Doug? Like I'm a little less terrified?" He'd say, "Peter, can you feel it? Can you feel it?" "What? Then I'm a little less anxious." "What? Can you feel it? Can you feel it?" When you hold your hands out, perhaps even now like that, and just breathe for a moment. Perhaps you can feel it. And perhaps you and I together can feel it. Amen.